Welcome to Sandy's Library. I'm Sandy, and in this video I'm going to read you some more of my book, If I Had Married You. And just please remember, this is not a professional production. This is just an author reading her book. So let's get started. Chapter 10. Pregnancy does strange things to a woman. First, it interferes with our ability to tell time. The further along we get, the worse it becomes. By the third trimester, we're certain we've been pregnant for at least 18 months. I was no exception to this rule. By the time May rolled around, I was 8 months along and feeling bigger than a house and just as attractive. The last thing I needed was the Army taking you away from me. I had just gotten used to the idea that we were actually going to be parents in a few weeks. The notion that the Army could step in at the last minute and throw a monkey wrench into our plans had never occurred to me. When you came home that day, your news was peeking out in your smile. "Hey, soldier," I said, wondering what you were up to. I was in the kitchen about to stick a chicken along with some carrots and potatoes in the oven for dinner. I paused with my hand on the oven door and gave you a quick once-over and followed it up with a little smile. You came to me in the kitchen, resting your hands on my ginormous belly while you gave me a sensuous kiss that made my knees go weak. I asked, "They teach you that in platoon leader handbook?" "No, ma'am," you grinned and cut my cheeks in your hands. "That information is privy only to Company XOs." Company XO? I was pretty sure what that meant. You'd been promoted to first lieutenant. I looked to you for clarification. You nodded. So I said, "Hell, if I'd known I was kissing the company's executive officer, I would put a little more effort into it." Then I wrapped myself around you, saying, "Baby, I'm so proud of you. But what happened to Tate?" You said, "Promoted." Your smile was having a hard time keeping up, which told me there was more. Why do I get the feeling the other shoe's about to drop? I wondered out loud. "There is more," you said cautiously. I was right. I blew out a sigh and said, "Why do I get the feeling that I'm not going to like this?" You said, "I get the feeling you're going to hate it." You didn't have to say it, and I knew you didn't want to. Still, you wanted to go. Sure, I knew that. That's what all soldiers live for, to go soldier. That didn't make it any easier for you to walk away from me, but the good news was it was only temporary. I touched your cheek, enjoying the feel of the heat radiating from your skin. It made me want to kiss you for starters. Instead, I asked, "Where are you going, and for how long?" "Training in Kansas," you said. "Just 3 weeks. It's for the XO position." I didn't miss the measure of hope that had slipped out in your tone. "When do you leave?" I asked. You said, "Sunday." That's soon, I thought. I felt my knees go weak, and not just from kissing you either. Your jovial tone had been sidelined by the time you added, "I can ask to postpone it if you want me to." Well, hell yes, I wanted it postponed. Of course I wanted you by my side when I gave birth to our son. I never wanted to spend another night apart from you. I made sure to look into your eyes when I asked. That wouldn't be very helpful to your career, would it? You said softly, and not the least bit grudgingly, "No, baby, it wouldn't." I sucked in another deep breath, hoarding all the courage I could muster. It wasn't easy to say, but I said it. "Then you're going to go." I spoke with such certainty that I surprised even myself. "And you're not going to express concern about me at all, at least not to your superiors." "Are you sure?" you asked. "I know you've been worried about this baby throughout the whole pregnancy. I don't want to add to that." "Baby," I said, "I know what I signed up for when I married you. I looked into your eyes, trying to caress them with my thoughts. You go do what you gotta do. Me and Junior will be right here waiting for you when you get back. I glanced down at my belly and added, one way or another. You cupped my face in your hands again, saying, I was so looking forward to watching our son make his appearance into the world. You can still be here for that, I said. And if you're going to be gone 3 weeks, then you'll return a day or two before my due date. I offered you a hopeful smile. So you could be back in time, I said, as if I said it enough times it'd happen, right? And just in case I'm not, you grinned, Samantha can't videotape it for me. It was a terrible idea. Me and a video camera on the day when I'd be at my most vulnerable. Yet I knew that's exactly what I'd do. I'd do anything for you. The morning of Friday, June 8th, 3 days before you were scheduled to return home, I waddled into the kitchen looking for juice. My mother, who'd flown in the week before from my hometown of Willow Falls, Texas, was already in there, standing over the stove. She turned slightly enough to see me and said, I've made French toast and bacon. My favorites, but I just wasn't hungry. I pulled the carton of OJ out of the fridge and went to the cabinet for a glass. I reached up to the lower shelf, and that's when it happened. My water broke. At first, I wasn't sure what had happened. It didn't come gushing out. It was more like a trickle, and it left me wondering if I'd peed my pants. My mother was at my side in an instant, asking, What's wrong? I glanced down at my feet as water continued to trickle down my legs. I was powerless to stop it. Looking back up into my mother's gaze, I said, I think my water just broke. She looked down, then glanced back up at me, and said, Yes, I believe it has. She smiled and patted my arm. You call Samantha, and I'll get your bag. You do have a bag packed for the hospital, right? Yes, Mother, I chuckled. She'd asked me that the day she arrived, and again yesterday. My bag is still packed, and it's still in the coat closet. I needed to give her something to do while I called Samantha, so I said, and don't forget to call Dad. Most of my family lived about 5 hours away in Willow Falls, save my sister, who, last we'd heard, was somewhere in New York City. Mom came back into the kitchen with my bag and set it on the table. I will, she said, just as soon as we get you to the hospital. Relax, Mom, I told her. The hospital is literally 5 minutes away. That's right, she sighed heavily. We're on an army post. She seemed to calm down then, remembering we didn't have to drive to a civilian hospital across town. Samantha was at my back door in less than a minute. She lived on the next street over and had cut through our backyards. She had the video camera we borrowed from Captain Garcia's wife, Victoria. You and I were refraining from making unnecessary purchases at the time, since we only had one income now, and a baby on the way. At least until I could start bringing in a few bucks by offering voice and piano lessons. Thank goodness I had a standing grant at my disposal. My grandmother had given it to me. My mom called my dad just before we left the house. I'm sure he thought his grandson would have made his appearance by the time he arrived at Fort Mitchell some 6 hours later. But there I was, lying in a hospital bed, approximately 4 centimeters dilated, and I hadn't felt a single pain. Around 6 p.m., Captain Holbrook decided to induce labor. Junior made his debut right before 10 o'clock that evening, weighing 8 pounds and 3 ounces and coming in at 21.5 inches long. His skin tone was darker than mine, but not as dark as yours, more like a cafe au lait tone, and he had a full head of black hair. And when he looked up at me with those crystal blue eyes that he'd gotten from my grandmother, I about died overcome with joy. My only regret is that you weren't there to greet our son the moment he was born. But I don't ever want you to feel guilty about that. You were off doing what you needed to do to secure our future. I didn't mind then, and I still don't mind now. I know that someday you will walk away from the Army, and then I'll have you all to myself. Samantha and my parents came back to the hospital bright and early Saturday morning. My parents were all gaga over the baby, so after I finished feeding him, when the nurse took him back to the nursery, they tagged along. All of our children were born in a time when they kept babies in the nursery, even the healthy ones. I envy new mothers today. As long as their babies are healthy, they don't leave their side. Later, as I sat there gazing down at Junior in my arms, I wondered how your parents would react to him compared to my folks, who were completely smitten when they finally did get to meet him. Your parents were coming out later in July from upstate New York to meet their new grandson. And me, I'll admit, I was a little bit nervous about that. But I did have an ace up my sleeve, Junior. Samantha came in, grabbed the video camera out of the closet, popped the tape out and stashed it in the top drawer of the table next to my hospital bed. She said with a weary glance, I want to get this camera back to Captain Garcia's wife. Samantha and I were in good with the brass, and we didn't want to muck that up. We were both keenly aware that if we did, it would most likely be you and Steve who paid the price. Samantha was in and out all day after that. I was feeling a bit exhausted, a whole lot overwhelmed, and a touch sad that you weren't due back until Monday. It broke my heart that our son would be 3 days old before you got to meet him. I fed the baby shortly after they'd brought my dinner at 5. When he was done, the nurse took him back to the nursery and I settled in for a little nap. I was practicing getting used to napping when the baby slept. I've been told by more than one mother that doing that would save my sanity. And I wasn't taking any chances. I had no idea what time I woke up, but I found out later that it was a little after 8 that evening. All I remember is the feeling of panic setting in at the sight of Junior's empty bassinet at my bedside. Then I remembered the nurse had taken him back to the nursery. Instantly, I wanted my baby back in the room with me. I sat up to reach for the nurse's button. That's when I saw you out in the hallway heading toward my room. Your eyes were fixed on the baby blue bundle in your arms. My heart skipped a beat. I sucked in a breath and reached up to run my fingers through my hair. I was overjoyed to see you, bringing Junior back to my room. I said, "You're here." You glanced up at me with this light in your eyes, and it instantly filled me with hope. Our baby was fine. We were fine. Everything was going to be okay. You placed Junior in my arms, then kissed me and crawled onto the bed with us. "You did good, darling," you said, snuggling me close. "How are you here?" I asked, touching your cheek. "You weren't due back until Monday." You grabbed my hand and kissed it. "Colonel Jeffries called me back this morning when he heard the news. I was pretty much done anyway." "Well, in that case, welcome home, soldier." I acknowledged the baby with a slight gesture. "Sorry I can't reach properly." You winked at me and said, "You'll get a pass." After a second, your eyes drifted over to Junior's face. "He's absolutely perfect," you said, stroking his cheek. We were so happy that day, lying there in that hospital bed, you, me, and our baby boy. It was a picturesque scene, and I remember it perfectly, like it happened only yesterday. We were young, and this time, I'm certain we were in love. We'd seen our share of heartaches, but now it seemed that life was truly looking up. My heart was filled with joy, but I couldn't forget that we were at the Army's beck and call. Chapter 11. In mid-July, your parents came for a 2-week visit. I was a nervous wreck by the time they arrived. My whole life, it seems, I've always been under scrutiny, but this was one of the few times that I truly wanted somebody to like me. Since our son was technically a third, you were actually the junior. It took nothing for me to gain your father's favor. I did that when I delivered our son. Your mother came bearing gifts. She brought me a box of your baby things. Your christening gown and a rattle were among them. I gained her favor by turning the christening over to her. It was such a small thing from where I was standing, yet it made her incredibly happy. I was in like Flynn after that. We were so happy. I'd almost forgotten that we were in the Army. And, while it's true, I've never enlisted or received a commission like you had, but I was still beholden to the Army's whims. The Army has a way of reminding us wives of her presence in our lives, not to mention the stronghold she has on our husbands. My wake-up call came one day near the end of your parents' visit. You came home at lunchtime, as you typically did. From the family room that was sandwiched between the living and dining rooms, I could hear the garage door open. I got up from the couch, caressed Junior's face. Your mother was holding him while your father was watching television, the History Channel. I said to the baby, "Daddy's home," as I made my way into the kitchen across from the dining room. From there, I moved into the laundry room just as you opened the door leading in from the garage. When you saw me, you smiled and said, "Hey, sweetheart." You came to me, wrapping me in your embrace. Between your kisses, you asked, "How's it going?" "Fine," I said, and pointed toward the family room. "Your mom is enjoying her time with Junior." "Thank you," you said to me, with an adoring light in your eyes. I asked, "For what?" "For letting my mother dote on Junior," you said. "Oh, baby, that's her grandson," I said. "Why wouldn't I let her dote on him?" You asked, "Have I told you lately that I love you?" "This morning," I smiled, "but it's always good to hear." "I love you," you said with certainty. "And I love you." You sighed and said, "Don't forget you said that." You grabbed my hand and pulled me toward the kitchen. I stopped, yanking my hand away. My nerves reached up and rattled my voice when I asked, "What do you mean?" With a gentle touch, you took my hand to lead me into the family room. You stopped near the staircase on the opposite wall, glanced at your parents, and said, "Mom, Dad, we'll be right back." You turned to me saying, "We have to talk." I followed you upstairs, asking, "Babe, what's going on?" Now I was truly scared. We went into our bedroom where you closed the door, then went to the foot of our bed and sat down. You took several seconds to look up at me. I was still standing over you. You patted the bed at your side and said, "You'd better sit down." My knees had gone weak, so I did as you suggested. Once on the bed, I looked to you for answers. "Okay, so I'm sitting. What gives?" You took my hand in yours. "I got new orders today." "Orders?" I asked. I wasn't sure what was going on, but based on your demeanor, it couldn't be good. "To Korea," you said, "for a year." "Korea?" I asked. I guess I always knew there was a chance the Army would send us overseas. But Korea? You said, "It's a hardship tour, babe." Hardship tour? Wait, I'd heard about those. That meant your husband was going, but you, the wife, and any kids were staying behind in the States. "When?" I uttered, the word over my grated voice. "November," you said, tightening your grip on my hands. You knew my instincts were to pull away, to go hide inside myself. But you wouldn't let me do that, you said. "You know I wouldn't leave you if I didn't have to." I knew that. I sighed and relaxed. "Okay, well, that's not so bad. At least you're not leaving next week." I had to find a way to be okay with it, and I had to do it fast. I wanted you to be completely focused while you were away. I didn't need you worried about me and now Junior. I looked at you and said, "We'll get through it," I nodded. "Me and Junior will be right here waiting for you when you get back." And then a scary thought crossed my mind. "We do get to stay in this house, right?" You nodded and smiled. "Yes, you get to stay here." I blew my relief out in a sigh. I suppose we could have rented a place off post, but I think we both felt better about me and Junior staying on post while you were away. I wasn't happy about you leaving for an entire year, but at least I had a few months to get used to the idea. I had to find a light at the end of the tunnel. It came for me in the notion that the separation wasn't forever. It would come to an end, and we would be together again. A couple of days after your parents left, Samantha's next-door neighbor, Victoria Garcia, wife of Captain Garcia from Charlie Company, showed up at our back door. I opened the screen door while holding Junior in my arms. I said, "Come on in. What's up?" "How's that baby?" she asked, cooing over him. "He's just perfect," I said, putting him in the swing, then turned to her. "You want to come? Sit down?" I asked with a gesture to the dining room table. "You want some coffee?" "Oh, no thanks," she said, waving it off as she sat down. "You've got enough to do without waiting on me." She seemed not to care about formalities, so I sat down at the table, kitty-cornered from her. "I was talking with Samantha the other day," she told me. "She said you two are cousins," she added, and I took it for small talk. "That's right," I nodded. Surely she hadn't come over to talk about our mothers being sisters. There had to be more. I waited for it. She laid her perfectly manicured hand, her left one complete with pink fingernails, on the table. Her wedding rings glistened in the sunlight. She said, "Samantha tells me you play the piano." She paused for a bit while gazing at me, then added, "Quite well, I'm told." I've never been comfortable tooting my own horn, so I shrugged and said, "I'm a music teacher by trade." "And you have a piano here?" she asked, looking around. I nodded and pointed toward the front of the house, which had a family room and a living room. We had put the piano on the interior wall in the living room at the front of the house, with the thought in mind that it was the perfect place for piano and voice lessons. And there was a powder room near the front door, so if the kids needed a bathroom, it was conveniently right there. All I needed now were some students. "Have you ever thought about teaching piano lessons?" she asked hopefully. "Funny you should ask that," I chuckled. "Been thinking lately of doing just that." That's the day I got my first students. The captain's children, Penny was 10 and David was 8, and according to their mother, they were in desperate need of direction of some sort. Her words, not mine. Word got around, and by the time school started, I had 4 half-hour lessons blocked out for each weekday afternoon. 5 students in all. Most of the lessons, though, ended up as parents buying practice time on my piano. I wasn't charging a lot for the lessons, only $5 back then. I wanted the enlisted kids to have a shot at musical direction, too. During those early days, I was bringing in about $100 a week. So I figured every little bit helps, and it did. I was contributing monetarily, and I got to be a mother to our boy 24/7. Chapter 12. The weeks turned into months, and pretty soon we were deep into October. It's hard for a girl to stay positive when I had to spend the last few weeks before you left updating your will, creating a power of attorney, and discussing advance directives, including what you wanted to happen in the event the unspeakable happened. Junior was on the move, crawling, and it broke my heart that he'd be walking by the time you got back. But as you and I have learned over the years, it's best to concentrate on the things we can control and let the rest go. So I promised to take tons of pictures, send you a few, but I'd keep most of them in albums for you to immerse yourself in when you got back home, so you could see all that you'd missed. By mid-November, Samantha and I were contemplating a drive home for Thanksgiving, since Steve had left in September for a 6-month rotation to Guam. At the end of his rotation, he'd have a 3-week stopover in Korea for a training exercise with the entire unit before coming home. Samantha and I were sitting at the snack bar between the kitchen and dining room. She was having coffee, and I was sipping hot tea. trying to settle my queasy stomach. She glanced at me. "You look like shit," she said, then went back to stirring her sugar and hazelnut creamer into her coffee. I rolled my eyes and raked my hair out of my face. "Thank you for pointing that out." "You sick?" she asked. "No," I shook my head. "I think I'm going to start my period. My boobs are sore." "You look more tired than bitchy," Samantha said with a shrug. "Excuse me?" I asked. "Right before you start your period, you're bitchy," she said. She sipped her coffee and then looked at me again. "When are you supposed to start anyway?" This prickling little thought that had been building inside my head for several days now finally found its way to the forefront of my mind. I looked at Samantha asking, "What day is it?" Of course I knew very well what day it was. November 19th. "The 19th, she said, like she knew the thoughts roaming around inside my head. Could I really be pregnant? I thought. I felt my boobs. Ouch. Sure, that happens every month, but not to this degree. I'd only felt this once before, when we conceived Junior. The fact that I hadn't felt it with the baby we'd lost gave me some peace of mind. Another baby so soon wasn't in our plans. We'd been using condoms since Junior, considering how easily we got pregnant. The thing is, a couple of them broke. Even so, if I was pregnant, I wanted our baby. There was no way I could look at Junior and ever consider having an abortion. Oh God, I dragged out the words. I need a pregnancy test. Samantha headed to the PX to pick up a home test for me and promptly returned with it. Just inside our front door, she passed me the small brown paper bag. I took it and headed toward the bathroom downstairs. I stopped at the door and glanced over my shoulder to ask, "Anybody we know see you?" "No," she shook her head. Thank God. She and Steve had been trying, but with no luck so far for over a year. The last thing we needed was somebody telling him that so-and-so saw his wife at the PX and she was buying a pregnancy test. That would have been a cruel twist of fate, since Samantha had gotten her period a couple of days ago. In the bathroom, I dropped the toilet lid and sat down. Opening the box, I ran through all the reasons why a pregnancy right now wouldn't be a good idea. For starters, Junior was only 5 months old. Hell, he hadn't even started crawling good yet. That was enough reason right there. You wouldn't be back until October of next year. You were already going to miss Junior's first birthday. And if I was pregnant now, you'd miss the entire thing. Plus, a new baby would be 2 or 3 months old before you even returned home. All those things made being pregnant right now a really bad idea. And then I thought about Junior. He brought so much love into our lives. How could I deny him a little brother or sister? I pulled the cap off the stick and told myself, I just thought it was going to be a couple more years or so down the road. Moments later, I pulled the stick out of my urine stream, recapped it, and prepared to wait. Up to 10 minutes, according to the instructions for the results. My better judgment told me to sit down and come back in 10 minutes. You know what they say, a watched pot never boils. But I couldn't help myself. I stared at the stick. I was mesmerized as urine made its way up the interior and across the display window. As soon as it hit the center of the window, a line began to appear. I knew what that meant. The last time I'd seen one of these, Junior was born roughly 9 months later. I dropped my face into my hands, still holding onto the stick, and I began to cry loudly. Now that it was real, I wanted this baby more than anything. But I was also scared. I was afraid of having to take care of a baby and go through another pregnancy all by myself. The only thing you'd be able to offer was financial and moral support. I wasn't knocking either. I just wasn't sure if I was up to the task that had been laid at my feet. The bathroom door eased open. Samantha said, "Everything okay in here?" I looked up to see her peeking inside at me. The thought of having to say it out loud made me want to cry even more, so I simply handed her the stick and dropped my face back into my hands. "Hey," her voice sounded more like it was on my level now, as opposed to towering over me. I moved one hand away from my face and looked at her through my tears. She was kneeling at the edge of the toilet now. "It's not as bad as all that, is it?" she asked, and tossed me a soft smile. "Maybe you weren't planning on it so soon, but you have been entertaining the notion, right?" I nodded and shrugged. "It's just that I'm going to be alone for the entire pregnancy. This new baby will be a few months old before it even gets to meet its father." All my fears were crowding back into my head, and they were affecting my tone, which was now approaching screeching. "And I'll have to tell him all this all over the phone." Samantha grabbed my hands and held them loosely. "Look, I'm going to be right across the yard the whole time." Her tone held a measure of certainty that helped set my mind at ease. "Hell," she laughed, "if you need me to, I'll move in here with you. The point is, we've got friends here. Friends who are going to help. They're going to help you get through this. We're all going to help you get through this." She gave me a nod and added, "I'm going to see to it." A couple of days after the pregnancy test, our parents, Samantha's and mine, informed us they were coming to us for Thanksgiving. Our mothers are sisters, so this sort of thing happened a lot when we were kids. We were always vacationing together, dining out once a week, and we even lived in the same neighborhood. Samantha volunteered our house for dinner, claiming it was bigger than hers and Steve's. I still doubt that, and even if it wasn't by much. Besides, I'd been tired lately. Now I knew why. And there would be a huge mess to clean up afterwards. Not to mention, I still had to take care of Junior 24/7. "I'm on kitchen duty," Samantha promised me. "You won't have to wash a single dish." I studied her for a moment. "How about pots and pans?" Samantha laughed. "Your hands won't touch a dirty dish, utensil, bowl, pot, pan, nothing. You will not step 4 foot in the kitchen all weekend, except to get food and water. How about that?" All weekend, huh? Maybe this pregnancy thing was going to turn out to be more of an advantage than I thought. I decided not to tell my parents about the new baby until I could talk to you first. In a picture-perfect world, you would have found out when I did, but we lived in the Army's world, so we had to make the best of it. But I was determined that you'd be the second person behind Samantha to find out.